I gave Alex a half of a second warning that we were going live.
Was it half a second? I don't know. I felt less than that.
Well, that's more than I normally do. I normally just go live and then tell you 2 minutes after we went live.
We're live.
I was like, by the way, don't say anything that you don't want to say live because we're live.
Because we're live. I love it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Red Couch Theology Podcast. We were both expressing the fact that this episode should be really short because neither one of us has margin in our lives.
We don't have the time to do it.
We don't have time to talk about margin.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, how does that make you feel when you preach a topic that you feel like is a weakness?
So I have this theory that someone shared with me a long time ago that sermons are like love letters. When you write a love letter to, when you're in those early days of a relationship and you're like, oh, like you're the best thing in the world and I can't imagine life with that. Actually, the theory is that a lot of the time you're writing for your own sake. Like, you're not really telling the other person anything. You're getting your feelings out on paper. Like, it's actually more self-directed.
Huh.
And I actually think in those moments, sermons, there's maybe a theory that sermons that are that way are the best sermons.
Yeah.
Like the ones where you've had the space to say, like, I actually could do with sitting in a front row and someone telling me this stuff. Because I haven't figured this out.
I feel like the last few sermons that I was assigned were like, oh, why am I talking about this?
Yeah, and you're a little bit more wired to feel that anyway. You know, I was just in a spiritual direction session, and I actually said to her at some point, like, if you're an Enneagram person, if you believe in the Enneagram, how do you live as a 7, knowing that most of the time is in your head? Like, how do you actually make sure you don't become dead-hearted?
Yeah.
Because 7s can be quite prone to manufacturing emotions or feeling like they need to. Whereas you're a little bit more wired to be like, oh, I feel this deep inside of me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's a cerebral process. Get over it. So I think you're
so funny because I tested as a 7 for a while, and like my wife would have thought definitely a 7.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know, like I had maybe a stint where I couldn't handle the emotion, so I like bottled it up, and then it felt very 7-y of me. So.
But you are quite a feeler. You're quite like a...
I am, which is what tipped the scales for me when I was processing Enneagram. And I was like, wait a minute. The only person that thinks that I'm not emotional is like myself in certain occasions. Yeah. And those times I'm lying to myself.
Yeah. And you think about, you've talked about like you'll tear up in sermons at different points. I've cried in like maybe one sermon ever. And if you think about the ratio of sermons that I do compared to you, that percentage-wise, that massively skews.
Yeah. 0.0001% of your sermons have tears.
So I have to really create space to feel emotion.
So last time I preached was probably where I got the least emotional. Uh-huh. And I got off stage and I was like, I did it, Allison. I didn't cry. She's like, yeah, you did. And I was like, I did? And she said, well, you got a little choked up during this section. I was like, I don't think so. And then I went back to watch it and I was like, oh my goodness, I totally did.
I think you, and that's the challenge. You know, someone once said, like, actually, like the request of the average congregation member around like how you share from the platform is like, be yourself. And be honest, but not too honest, because then it starts to feel like a therapy session. And be funny, but not too funny, because you're not a comedian, you're a preacher. And talk about your family, but not too much, because it's weird if you talk about them too much. And blah, 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 blah. And, generally just be yourself. It's like so much like, oh, that's what you're expecting. So I think when I get into those spaces where I feel like I wish I could hear a sermon on this or someone could unpack this for me, I'm generally like quite excited because I'm like, oh, this is going to land in a good space. Because if I'm feeling it, like I always joke, I'm such a generic person. Like in terms of like,
not when it comes to pants, evidently.
Well, maybe not, but in terms of like even like take clothing.
Yeah.
Like if you go and see a mannequin in a store, You can take the clothes off a male mannequin and it will fit me 99% of the time.
That is so annoying to me.
I'm just like, I'm just over 6 foot. I'm about 180 pounds. I wear 32 pants. I wear a 42 regular
oh my
jacket.
goodness, so annoying.
I'm so generic. I think
there are no mannequins that are my size. Actually, there are no clothes that are my size. The fishing pool for me when it comes to clothing is so small, it's ridiculous. So which is why I look like an Eddie Bauer commercial, because they actually sell clothes that fit me.
I love it.
And even though I really want to look like a punk rocker, not an option.
Yeah,
punk rock clothes.
6'4", 250-pound punk rockers are
no,
a rare breed.
Like, no, you need to be like 5'11", literally no body fat whatsoever, a 30 waist. Yeah,
that's the vibe. So I tend to think if this is going to speak somewhere to my existence in life, this is probably going to hit some other people somewhere. Like I wish I was more. Maybe the word God orientated around scheduling and budgeting.
Yeah.
But I tend to struggle with both of those things. Like we the other week we got to the end of the month with no particular planning, and I looked at the like 6 o'clock in the evening on the last day. I looked at our checking account. And there was $2.10 in there. And I'm like, this was either really good planning or really bad planning.
Oh, man. So if you weren't there Sunday, Alex talked about margin. I'm assuming that you pieced that together from our introduction.
Yeah.
But we just dove right in.
We did. We could have introed that better. So
I think the reason I bring it up now is that we did a little self-deprecating conversation around neither one of us doing a great job with margin with our time and probably our finances. But I actually think that, in fairness to us, this is a very, very big struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Our society, this is one area of society, maybe just in the West, maybe just America, I don't know. We are just told, when in doubt, do more stuff. Both scheduling.
Shed. Think of it like what's in the back of your garden? Shed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What's in your yard?
Yeah. So I'm picturing in the back of your yard is a large calendar. No?
And a shed.
So anyway, yeah, this is just like one of those things I think is really hard to do well when it comes to living in America, living in the city that we live in. The loud message of society is do more, both stuff, buying stuff, and time stuff. Do more. When in doubt, do more.
Yeah. Well, and then there's a hidden agenda, like not necessarily perhaps a spiritual agenda. I don't know. That says, like, you got to keep up with everybody else. So like, theoretically, you meet occasionally those people. I helped a guy who was at the food bank last night. He brought his daughter because she likes to come and get food. Mm-hmm. And I get the sense he probably doesn't feel like he needs to. He doesn't shop. He just brings her and he'll walk with her.
Okay.
And he drives like a 1990 Jeep Cherokee that looks like it came off the showroom floor.
It's just
like it looks
immaculate.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's got 200,000 miles on. Why would I buy a new car? This thing's killing it. It's great in the snow. Like, I've had it for ages. Like, there's no impulse in him apparently that says it's time to upgrade. Yeah. Whereas if you were to speak to someone in their 30s, 40s, there's maybe more of a sense, like it's rarer there to meet people that are like, oh no, this 20-year-old car's just killing it. Like, yeah, I'm just going to keep it. That's a rarer thing in that demographic. Yeah. There's this feel that's created when you see your friends upgrade and you're like, ooh, like, it's time for us to You go over to the house and they've got some new stuff. Maybe they've done a remodel and you're like, oh man, this is how bizarre it is. Our neighbors just put in a new garage door. And it's like wood look with like the glass panels at the top. And Laura and I turn around to each other and said, do you see their glass door? And their garage. Like, and then a friend came up and she was like, wow, I love your neighbor's like garage door. I'm like, that's apparently where we are now, the age of garage door envy. It's really weird.
Yeah, but I'd like to say that I didn't know what you're talking about but one of our neighbors got one last summer and that was definitely a conversation Alice and I had too. It's just like, oh, ours actually kind of slumps in the middle.
Yeah.
Kind of bent.
It probably functions like a garage door in that it opens still and it stops people coming in and allows you to work. Probably does all the things, but it's not as nice as question marks garage door. So for whatever reason, we live in that space where we see the struggle with trying to find margin is you're also competing against what everybody else has and what everybody else does. So what I said on Sunday was comparison is the enemy of contentment, which is a famous phrase. But they added to it, but it's the companion of overcommitment. So it ruins your contentment because you see and you long for and you envy. And then the natural response is that you overcommit. You say, I'm going to get a car loan, and that actually becomes a burden that you don't really want and can't really afford. Or you go and you spend you spend your savings on a garage door, and then you've got your garage door and you're like, darn it, like now I've just got a garage door. It's probably worth like half now what I paid for it, because I don't think the resale market on garage doors is killing it these days. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe there's like a bad thing for it. But
the resale. If I see a garage door on Facebook Market, I'll know that it's just you. Because literally, that's the first person ever to sell their own garage door right out from under their own house.
But if you lose whatever percentage driving a car off a forecourt, I don't know what the percentage you lose when you put a garage door on a garage, but I'm guessing it's pretty high.
Wow.
So we're not only fighting an expensive place that may be expensive for all those different things, and like the inflation thing that we've talked about before, but we're also fighting our own desire to be seen, to be valued, maybe to be thought of as successful and worthy, and all those different things that they're actually pretty natural human experiences to a degree, and maybe exacerbated by the cultural moment that we live in.
Yeah, and I don't think it's new to our generation. Otherwise, I mean, the Bible talks about it a lot, which indicates to me that this was something that humans humans struggle with. But there's something strange about being human, that we feel these problems, like I don't fit in, or I'm not as good as my neighbor if I don't have X, Y, Z. Or whatever, right? These are just human emotions and struggles that we have. And then insert solution to said problem. Solution is keep up with them.
Yeah.
Solution is buy the garage door.
Yeah.
Solution. And so we're wired to solve those problems, and the world tells us how to solve those problems. This is what marketing does. Yeah. Marketing says, oh, you're having this emotional feeling of being inadequate. Insert our product, makes that feeling go away.
And you're now dealing in a way that maybe is new with experts in selling to need.
Yeah.
There's a writer called Shane Hips who became a pastor, but before that used to work for Porsche. And he said, like, I was basically selling salvation for $150,000. Like the theory was it was going to make you feel like you'd achieved something. And then people would find out. And so there's all these people that are, do you shop at Costco?
We used to.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a reason that Costco has big screen TVs as soon as you walk in the door. It's because it's not an easy sell item, but you walk past those big screen TVs every month for a year. And every time you walk past, there's a bit of you that's like, oh man, that screen is so bright. And like our TV, it's kind of getting old. Like it's a slow tick, 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 tick of like. So now, and we like every time it's an old Simpsons quote that I throw at my kids. But every time we go to Costco, I'm like, we're getting a new TV, and all the kids are like, yeah. And my wife's like, no, we're not getting a TV.
Yeah.
But eventually, I bet you we get a new TV.
Yeah.
Because there's the pull of like those beautiful screens.
So to switch gears to your message, the scriptures shout in the face of that impulse. So there's an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not adequate. I'm insufficient. I'm whatever. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the solution to that thing is to buy a TV, to buy a garage door, to fill my schedule, to work more hours so that I could have the money so that I can keep up. So just fill in the blank. Here's what I can do to solve this emotional problem. Yeah. What do the scriptures say is the alternative?
So there's a couple that we referenced. One just at the very top, and I read it briefly, but we're going to come back to it at different points. Is 1 Timothy.
Yeah.
I was just looking for it because I think my memory of 1 Timothy is this. I'm pretty sure this is where Paul, it's 1 Timothy 6, I think it's verse like 6 or something like that it starts. But my kind of memory of it is that Paul basically says, oh, by the way, godliness with contentment is great gain, and that gives you no reason why it's great gain. It's like Paul, you're not selling this well. You would not sell Porsches for $150,000 a year. So yeah, godliness with contentment is great gain. Why? Yeah, well, we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. And I don't maybe. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not great gain while you're here, but we'll take him at his word. And maybe he's kind of referring back to some of the stuff he's talked about the quarrels and the strife and the people that are robbed of truth, all those different things. So let's give him some grace. For if we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich, and this is definitely true, fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith, pierced themselves with many grief. Now the fascinating thing about this passage is at no point is there a criticism of people that have money. Actually, the criticism is most obviously leveled at people that don't have money and want to get it.
Yeah.
That's his concern. Now, of course, some people may have taken that journey, but I know rich people who are in no way attached to their money.
Yeah.
And I know poor people, maybe myself actually, who's very conscious of money. Like if I process something from a level of how am I going to provide for my family doing this? How am I going to how can I side hustle to do? I have a sense a lot of the time mentally where I think I'm our provider. Like in terms of getting to a point of believing God is our provider, I, who am not rich, definitely struggle with that. Whereas there's a whole bunch of rich people that are I have nothing that God didn't give me. So I think it's interesting that the critique is not of the rich. The critique is of the desire to be rich.
Yeah, and there's definitely rich people who desire to be richer.
Yeah, sure.
And they fall in that same exact camp.
Exactly,
and we look at them and be like, man, if only you knew how awesome you have it. And they're like, if I don't have more, I'm not going to survive.
Yeah. There's a legendary story. I can't remember who it is, but it's of some really wealthy person where someone asks him, which is your favorite million that you made? And he's like, the next one.
Isn't that Mr. Burns?
It's not. No, Mr. Burns is the one that says, you're the richest person I know. And he says, it's true, I am rich, but I'd trade it all for a little more.
Yeah.
Just genius, right? You're like, oh yeah.
I trade it all for a little more.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yes, you can be rich and struggle with all the things Paul talks about here. You can be poor and struggle with the same things. And you can be poor or rich and not struggle with these things at all. So I kind of had played with teaching this passage this week, but thought I might keep it for another week. And so I actually went to Ecclesiastes. So like, it's quite often fun when you see these things that we're wrestling with to say, well, what's the ancient wisdom say on this? Because there are things that Jesus says that are brand new, but then there are also ways where he just re-articulates some things that have been ancient wisdom for a while. And then like, I'm really conscious that we live in a world where we think that wisdom has to be new to be wise, because the world changes so fast. So you think like if someone hands you a Microsoft Windows 97, what's the term I'm looking for? Like instruction manual or something.
Okay.
And says like this is really important stuff. You're like, no, it's not. If you're using Windows 97 now, you have a huge problem. And we get throwback pictures.
That was a good year, though.
Yeah, it was a good year, but we have throwback pictures of like Steve Ballmer dancing on stage and stuff as they reveal it and all those different things. Like it's done, it's old, and it looks old now. You look at it on screen, it looks old. You look at the people that did the reveal on it, they look like they're dressing like old. So wisdom here passes out of date really quick. Information dies really quick. We start to say that doesn't apply anymore. That doesn't apply anymore. That doesn't apply anymore. If you tried to give screen guidelines for your kids from the 1990s, like screen time guidelines, like they don't apply anymore. Like, we're living in a whole different world. Like you go back and watch Friends. People never open a cell phone in pretty much the whole series.
Yeah.
Like it's a different world. Whereas that wasn't the Jewish.
Remember back in the olden days when you had a show that you really liked and you'd watch it and then you just had to like wait till the next week to watch the next episode?
Yeah. I think that's actually partly what people loved about Game of Thrones. It felt like people were doing that again, like they were waiting for the next episode in real time. So there were the conversation, but that we've lost that to such a degree. There's a story about an old TV show in England where, after it was on, people would walk down the street and they'd shout quotes across the street to people because everybody knew everybody was watching it.
Yeah.
So that's like, again, like whole different world to us. So back in the Ecclesiastes experience, actually a question people would be more likely to ask is, how old is this wisdom? How proven over time is it? When you're in a culture that shifted minusculely over hundreds of years. I mean, it's crazy for us to imagine the world changed less from Moses to Jesus than it did from the 1990s to now.
Yes. Now, so I love this. The professor that I have currently, he made this statement that I was like, oh, I'll see how I want to sit with that and see if I believe it fully. But I think he's on to something. And I won't be able to quote him exactly, but he was talking about biblical interpretation. And he said, like, if you're reading and trying to interpret the Old Testament, you have to remember that we are so drastically different than they are that almost nothing is the same.
Yeah.
He said there's only two things that are the same, and they've been the same from the foundation of the world all the way till now. And that's sin and the goodness of God.
Yeah. That's it.
And you're like, oh, and then, obviously you say that statement. So the brokenness of the world and the goodness of God are the two steady things throughout time. And then you start to look at a thing like margin or greed or finances and stuff. You're like, oh, this is a space that is still such a struggle because humans struggle with it. They used to struggle with it. They struggled with it 4,000 years ago. They struggled with it 2,000 years ago. They struggle with it today. It's the same old rinse and repeat story.
I might quibble with I'd also want to argue for the image of God buried deep in each human being or something like that. But
well, that's all the goodness of God in his camp. Yeah. So he buckets it is God's nature and human nature.
Yeah, and you always sometimes feel like a bucket sometimes gets so big it's no longer a bucket.
Yeah.
Like you need another bucket.
Yeah.
There's only so much sand you can get in a bucket.
Fair enough.
But I think, yes, broadly, like there's things that change all the time and then things that just never change.
Yeah, like human nature, like we can talk about like we're on cell phones and there's artificial intelligence and all of this stuff going on. We're like, oh man, we're so different. And yet Ecclesiastes is writing about struggle with margin and money. We're so the same. Like,
Yeah.
like
So
in that category, we're like no different than they are.
The complication we get, if anything, is easy access to everything we want. Like, even you think you and I growing up, our experience was if you loved a particular piece of music where you had to wait till it was available, you had to save up the money, you had to buy the CD or the record or the tape cassette, whatever it was, depending on your era, you had to have the right instrument to play it on, all those different things.
Yeah.
And then like availability was a question. Can you even find that anywhere? And now I just go, hey Siri, play Abbey Road. And it might even actually do it, even though I wasn't intending it to do it. I think she's dead. Hey Siri, play Abbey Road. Couldn't find that in your Apple Music library. Do you want me to play a radio station? She's struggling today. Maybe there's no signaling here, but
we're struggling. We just don't have access to everything that we wish we had.
And now we feel it, right? We're like, what's the deal? You know?
What's the deal?
Is that a better example because it didn't?
The universe owes me Abbey Road right now.
Yeah. And I'm surprised one of your devices didn't start playing it somewhere. So I think we if anything, like this information becomes more pertinent to us because of how available everything is, rather than less pertinent. So it's like wisdom that's getting wiser as the years go past.
Interesting. That's an interesting thought.
So the passage I picked was Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4 through 6. And then I also read, I think, 7 through 11.
Yeah, it was a great chapter for this topic.
Oh, yeah. And I love this chapter. And I love, like, Ecclesiastes is one of those books where you kind of read it on the surface and you're like, man, this dude's depressed. Like, he needs some serious help. Like, why would I read him?
Yeah.
You know, he's got all of these ideas, like everything is meaningless.
No, his eyes are just wide open. That's
So everything is meaningless is the English reading, which is just such a horrible translation. I don't know why we got meaningless from it, really.
Vapor.
Yeah, I mean, vapor is so much better in my mind. Even something like ungraspable or something like that.
How about smoke machine?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Everything is smoke machine.
Yeah, something that expresses like it's not bad. Bubbles is another version I've heard.
Oh,
everything is bubbles. Like so like there's this idea of like God is the one who makes the bubbles and the bubbles are there to enjoy. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they don't last.
Yeah.
And even the bubbles that you treasure the most don't last.
Yeah.
So it gets real when you realize not only is the ability to play Abbey Road or to buy a Porsche a bubble, but my wife and kids are bubbles. Because I can't hold them or make them last forever on this earth. Like, and based on age and based on like genetics or based on male, female longevity, like statistics, like the probability is they'll lose me as a bubble before I lose them as a bubble. But bubbles we all are, and God is the only one who's ever present.
Yeah.
So like that seems to be more the tenor of Ecclesiastes rather than don't think it's valuable at all or don't. No, there's some valuables that are more, some bubbles, some vapor that's more valuable than others. But it's supposed to speak to the fact that you have no power to hold on to it. That you can't control that stuff.
Yeah.
So like we think we can control it. We think that we're safe when we have it and not safe when we don't. And really his whole overall tenor is like, don't obsess with trying to hold on to stuff that can't be held on to.
Yeah.
And interestingly, what's true of all those things, the harder you work to try and grab it, the more likely you are to lose it.
Yeah.
You work hard to try and grab bubbles, you're going to start breaking bubbles. Like maybe if you let one float into your hands and hold it gently, you'll get to hold it for a little while and enjoy it. But the more you grasp at it, that's what I think is some of what's behind his metaphor
this
here.
Passage.
I think.
Yeah.
So here he says, I saw that all toil and achievement spring from one person's envy of another. That's this idea that, comparison destroys contentment, is the enemy of contentment. But it's the companion of overcommitment. Somewhere like we work because we want to keep up, Other people work because they want to keep up. We all just build and build off each other. We're like toxic to each other. We inspire more and more and more and more. Who knows whether the guy that bought his new garage door didn't just see something that I'd done to my house.
He probably is in his house thinking, I finally arrived.
Yeah.
My life is complete. I've got my garage door. That's probably what he's thinking.
Or he may have thought, you know what, I kind of like that about Alex. Like, interestingly, our house was the first one to get the brick painted on our road.
Yeah.
And now like a whole other bunch of houses have their bricks painted.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, I like that. Like, you know, so we're all there. We're all like inspired. But we feel it when we feel our lack of contentment, and we don't feel it when someone else has a lack of contentment because of us. We only get to see the jealousy that we're inspired by. We don't get to see the jealousy that we inspire.
Yeah. And so part of the wisdom of this passage is this idea is like when you read it, you're like, oh, that's where it comes from. Duh, obviously. But then we're not awake to the reality. But he calls out something that feels like such a duh.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw all this toil and achievement springing from one's person's avenue. Oh, that's why I'm working too hard and slaving and spending way too much money. It's envy. Huh.
Yeah. Have you ever...
Well, it's like, duh, obviously.
Have you ever driven past a house and thought, I wish I had that house?
Yeah.
But then actually gone to the next step of wondering, I wonder what it feels like to actually own that house. Because there's probably another house that the person who sits in that house thinks, I wish I had that house.
Yeah.
And eventually there's the person who sits in a house and says, yeah, but I wish I had a yacht. And then there's the person that says, I wish I that has a yacht, that says, I wish I didn't have a yacht because it's so ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, a great example of that is the house that we own now. Like, the irony of all of this is, like, and we're super grateful. Like, we feel like the place that we're living in now, like, it's the best house I've ever lived in.
Yeah.
From when I was a child. Like, it's still the best house I've ever lived in. But we were living in a townhome. We got a dog, and we had no yard. And so it was like every time the dog has to go to the bathroom, we had to walk the dog or take the dog out. And we're like, it'd be so nice, like, one, for her sake. She just felt like she was cooped up all the time. And we had little kids. And so walking the dog was difficult because you're chasing a kid and a puppy at the same time. And so it was like a struggle. So we're like, man, if we just had a yard, this dog could actually play and enjoy the backyard. So it was one of the driving factors for getting a single family home. That plus we were having our family expanding. Well, then when we got this place, one of our biggest frustrations with our current place is our backyard has been destroyed by our dog. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So there's deep mud pits on both sides of the fence because the dog is scratched there and barks at the neighbor. The fence is being broken by our other dog because he's constantly barking and scratching at it for the other dogs. And then the dog's back there, quote unquote, we don't put him back there as often as we could because they bark
and destroy the lawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
bizarre,
just this,
right? Yeah.
It sounds a lot like this envy that drives this meaningless toil and this springing of all of the stuff. It's like, and it's meaningless or vapor. It's a chasing after the wind.
And then at the same time, like, in trying to get those things, which you may actually really enjoy, I would say we too live in the nicest house we've ever lived in. Then you potentially lose some things that were other joys.
Yeah.
Like, you work more to buy a bigger house and you spend less time with your family, which you actually loved. And so there's a great little parable that's floated around for years of a guy who's clearly wise enough to resist this. It's set in Italy, and there's this guy that goes out fishing every day, and he earns enough fish to live with his family and to enjoy his life as well. And so he'll go out fishing in the morning, and then in the afternoon he'll like go and play a round of golf, and he'll go and like sit with his kids, and they'll drink coffee in the piazza and all those different things. And these Americans are visiting because, you know, we're the source of like every inspiration towards achievement or whatever in the world. Yeah. And they say to him, like, have you ever thought, like, you should like buy a second boat and hire some people, and then like you could go and fish out. You fish longer hours, you make more money, start to sell to like bigger markets and do this. And the guy looks at him, he's like, why? And it's like, well, you know, like you can keep expanding, and then you'll have like more income coming in, and then like you'll like be able to eventually like work less. And the guy's like, why? He's like, well, then when you work less, you'll be able to like play a round of golf every now and again, and you'll be able to sit in the piazza drinking coffee as you watch your kids run around. And the guy's like, yeah, I would, but I'm doing that now. Like, you want me to give up the thing I'm actually doing so one day I can do the thing that I'm doing and love doing? Like, it just points to that little, like, we achieve so we can one day do something.
Yeah.
And then what happens if you miss out? Like, and then like, so I think America almost especially has sold work really hard and then rest on your laurels when you get to like 70 and then do all the things you wanted to do. And then you see surprising ways where that gets undercut. And if we paid attention, it would probably horrify us. Like I know a guy at the moment who he just retired and he just hit 68 and he got hit with this like long-term debilitating disease.
Yeah.
And now he's reduced to being able to do almost nothing. Now, I don't think
he has the money to, but
yeah, I don't think his strategy was particularly that, but if that was the strategy,
yeah,
you're like, oh my goodness, like he used all the years of good health working to one day do all the things that he can now no longer do. So I think there's just a
yeah, you're like you like work
there.
hard to provide for your family so that you can, provide for your kids or whatever, and then you're gone all the time. And then by the time you have the time to hang out with your kids, they don't want to hang out with you because you're never with them. There's no relationship.
Yeah. So I think there's all these different ways. Like actually one of the great pieces of advice, and I don't know if you would have repeated this all the time, but one of the pastors I worked for, I think he'd gone through a few like things himself that he was wrestling with. He sat me down one day. He said, Alex, cheat on the church to spend time with your wife. He's like, I want you to be skipping out on stuff to go take her for lunch in the middle of the day. Like find ways to to enter into those things where you can turn up in surprising ways.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think there's like this, there's occasionally here like this wisdom like Ecclesiastes, almost this anti-wisdom. Because the received wisdom has been like, build the storehouses, make sure there's no thing that can happen that will ruin your ability to survive. There's a guy my wife worked with, and he was like, basically, I'm recession proof. He said, I'm so diversified now, there's nothing that could happen that would change my ability to do whatever I want to do. It might affect the companies, but me personally, I'm good for everything. And so, yes, except not living and surviving.
Yeah, so I think I already talked about this on a semi-recent episode. This is the sorrow that Alex has to live with when I'm in seminary classes. Is it's just like when you spend hours and hours of your every week focused on seminary stuff, it tends to come up in conversation.
I have to dust off some stuff. I'm like, I haven't been in a seminary class now in nearly 20 years. So I have to like
that. Yeah. So, but I think that if we ask the question, what's the invitation of the way of Jesus or for the people of God to live differently than that? And first of all, that's actually what the Bible's doing. The Bible is offering us an alternative to the methods the world gives us to solve our problems. We have this envy. We have this, I wish I could keep up with our neighbor. We have this anxiety in our souls. And the world offers us solutions. Buy more stuff, work harder, whatever. But then the scriptures offer us a different solution. And that's actually almost all that's going on. All throughout the Bible is like the Jesus way. The reason we have living the way of Jesus with the heart of Jesus on our wall is because Jesus teaches a different way of being human. This is what's going on. And the beauty and irony of all of that is he made humans. So he's a pretty good expert on the subject of how humans thrive the best. But the reason it's on the forefront of my mind is probably my favorite part of the class that I'm in currently is when we talked about the inauguration of the kingship in Israel. So you have this strange reality that takes place where God is ruling the nation directly through judges and priests. He's leading the people. That's a struggle, and there's different issues with that, but he's sort of the leader of the people. And then they hit this moment where they're being spiritually abused by the leaders, the spiritual leaders, the priests, and so they ask for a king. But if you look back in Deuteronomy and the rules about what a king should be, so before there's a king, there's rules about how to have a king in Deuteronomy. And the rules are basically to strip the king of all of the things that a king is in the world. And I don't know of anything that shouts more trust in me than that.
Yeah.
So here's why they want a king. They want a king. Israel wants a king because they want someone to serve them. They want to be like the other nations and to know that they've got infrastructure systems, and they want when there's danger that they have an army that's going to come protect them, and they want to have all of this safety net around them.
It's hard for us.
And God's like, hey, I am that already.
Yeah.
And the only reason you want that is you don't believe that my way can provide for your needs.
And it's important to know, like even the kings we know of, like even if you go back to like the Revolutionary War, like King George, like, and back through monarchs of England for probably the last 1,000 years. It's probably about 1,000 years since warrior kings started to disappear.
Yeah.
And kings become like, so you have this period of time, right, where kings are like at the forefront of the battle.
Yeah.
And then they kind of move to the back.
Yeah.
And so like this is the kind of king we're talking about, like one with military genius, like one that can like defend them and structure society for them.
Build a government that then barters with neighboring nations and builds like alliances so that there's a safety an alliance safety net surrounding the nation.
You don't want a priest running out leading the nation in war.
Yeah. So this is why they want kings. For the same reason we want a president that we like in power is the same reason they wanted a king. It's because we think the solution to the dangers of life is that we have someone who's bigger and badder and scarier who's on our side than the other people. And God's like, I am that thing. I am the safety net. I am the provider of food and housing and alliance. There is no alliance that you need beyond me. And so the beauty about the rules written in Deuteronomy is here's the main rules. Don't, you're not allowed to be wealthy. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be a king of Israel, fine, have a king. No wealth, no weapons of warfare, no extension of wives, which was actually an alliance issue, right? Yeah. So having many wives was meaning don't make alliances with the nations around you, and be a Bible nerd.
Yeah.
This is so weapons, warfare, wealth, women, and be a person of the word. Yeah. So in other words, strip everything from the king that they think is going to protect them, and that kind of king you can have.
Yeah.
So basically, a completely impotent king in the world's eyes.
Yeah. But my goodness. Yeah, but the desire is still for a king that looks like the world.
But we do the same thing.
I mean, they ask for like other nations, and I think I've quoted him like 10 weeks in a row or something like that. It might be a new record. Oscar Wilde, like just playing 4D chess when everyone else is playing checkers. Like, there's only one thing worse than not getting what you want, and that's getting it. Like, I mean, just so pertinent to so many elements of life. You think that you're getting your heart's desire, and you find out that it vapors, it bubble bursts, it does all the things that all the metaphors that we just used. So he does have a posture in verses 4 and 5 as options. Like one, he does rule out like what may be a natural extrapolation from that. Like, well, just do nothing then, right? Just fold your hands and just like, just if God's going to provide, he's going to provide.
Yeah.
Like actually that's not the strategy, and has never been. Like hard work was super valued by, like actually Paul says something like specifically, I can't remember where the verse reference is, but he says I think it might be in Timothy again, like if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's never any point where it's just like there's a folding of the arms and are just like, okay, like, we'll figure that out. We'll bury our head in the sand. There's no ostrich posture here. And so like, you can't extrapolate from this. Don't own anything. Don't do anything. Don't function as a member of society. Like I threw in a quote from John Lennon, like where he's got his like, imagine no possessions. It's easy if you try, or something like that. And like this writer can't really imagine a world where there's nothing.
Yeah.
And no one owns anything. But then like the next verse 6 is the centerpiece of his strategy for how to live in this world. And I just think it's beautiful. Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. I actually taught this once in a series on, it was a series on Ecclesiastes as a whole, but I used it to talk about employment and how you worked, like running a business. And I actually had a guy come up to me afterwards who runs at the time ran a multi-million-dollar business. And he said, I changed my whole hiring decision based on this passage.
Wow.
Like he said, I realized that I was talking about entering into a partnership, like we're going to bring in this other partner, we're going to expand the business. And I started to think about his character and how we interacted as people. And I started to ask, like, so we're going to be richer, we're going to bring in more income, we're going to have a bigger business. How am I going to feel about life? And he said, all I could see was this posture of like 2 hands grasping with toil and like spitting into the wind, like might be a good example. Like, you can't spit successfully into the wind.
Unless your reflexes are fast, you can die.
Yeah.
Because it's coming back at you.
And he said, like, I just suddenly realized like we have enough. Like one hand with tranquility. That's what I'm looking for right now. Like, so you when you hear the power of the scripture to change the business practice of a super successful guy. Like this gives us something to live in, like when we're offered an opportunity to work more for a little bit more, you get to ask, like, what posture does this remind me of here? Is this grasping? Is this gaining more and more and more, or is this enough? Is this contentment? When we're given an opportunity to sign a car loan for a car that's 3 times as expensive as the one we drive now, it's the chance to ask, like, is this grasping, or is this like contentment? When we're like, all those different things.
And what it does sometimes require, like, which pulls back in this idea of wanting a king, is, again, there's this method the world offers you to solve the problem, and God's just like, trust me, trust the system. And you're right, it doesn't mean you don't work.
Yeah.
But there is a fine line that is called the Jesus way between surrender and negligence.
Yeah.
It's like the Jesus way finds that line, but you don't stop doing stuff.
Yeah.
But you also don't do stuff. You might work really hard, but you work really hard from a place of tranquility. Yeah. Like this passage talks about.
Well, there's loads of like so for like certainly the Protestant world from like the 15th century through to the 20th century, known hugely for their work ethic. The early Christians known hugely for their work ethic. These are groups of people that like knew how to get their hands dirty and enter into this world to try and make it better, to eke out a living, sometimes in some of the hardest places to eke out a living. Where it starts to nudge as well is like, well, actually, if you wanted to grasp more, like toil and chasing after the wind, well, cheat on your business partner. Like, cut a corner. Like, find a way to do a slightly sketchy trade, like push into something that's just a little bit illegal to make that a little bit more. And again, fine line of the Jesus way is the hard work and the trust that it will be enough, that God will maximize what is faithfully and truthfully earned.
Okay, so as we wrap up this conversation, what are some practices, or what are some steps that people could take this week? You gave an example of the story of someone hiring different, or deciding, you know what, we're not going to do the merger.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's a huge scale thing. What's the average everyday person that they could do this week to start at least like greasing the wheels of moving in a different direction when it comes to margin?
So a simple practice might be like, and let's take like the 2 big areas that I talked about of like schedule and budget. Like maybe one of the things is you just start in your schedule, like blocking in times of rest. Like I only caught onto this actually just yesterday. We were at a retreat, and I'd not really looked, at least for a long time, at like the Hebrew words around rest.
Yeah.
And there's obviously like the root of Sabbath, which is like almost like spiritual rest. It's like blocking off a day. It's a posture of almost emptying in a beautiful way, not building in lots of different things. And we'll talk about that actually in the new year. We got a whole week on Sabbath that we'll wrestle with that a little bit as we try and build a rule of life, or allow people space to build a rule of life. But one of the other words is like resting in community and fellowship. So actually like blocking in times to say no to work and yes to friends, family, and relationships, or naps, is maybe a strategy that like reduces our capacity. Maybe there's a conversation with your kids about like, no, this season, this year, we're going to do one sport each, not 3 or 5 or whatever, like the drive of this world says. Maybe there's budget wise, like the feeling of like, it's time to upgrade the car. And maybe the question is like, why? Like, could I see a scenario where there is no car payment, where there is like not the extra? Maybe it's not this year, but it's maybe putting in some long-term plans. Like maybe it's like pulling back some of the ways that we think about like having to be able to stream every single thing. And like, one of the things, it seems minor, but like my family, we have every single streaming service going. Now, some of them are because we have like phone services that provide them, but we pay a ridiculous amount for our phone services in part so they can give us these quote free streaming services. Like if you're paying $200 for a phone service, it's probably not giving you anything free.
Totally. Totally.
So like asking maybe like what that free time is worth, and those conversations get a little bit complex, but I think even just like nudging on them, like the why do we do this? Like, is there a...
Yeah. And I think when it really starts to get to the place where I think God had in mind for humans is when there's a slight moment of risk on taking that margin. Yeah. Like if it's super duper easy to cut, it may not be quite getting to the place of like this faith abandonment to the goodness and provision of God. So like one for me, I used to be, I would just work until the work was done. And then I started to like, there was moments where I'd be like, okay, my family's expecting me home by X time, and the project's not done. Mm-hmm. And it felt like a gamble to just leave that project for the next day or for the next week or whatever. It felt like this terrifying gamble. So, but I started to just go home on time. Mm-hmm. That felt like a massive risk for me.
There's a book called Sabbath by Wayne Mueller. Yeah. And it's so gentle. It's just beautiful. Now he pulls from tradition, from all sorts of traditions, even though his primary like faith tradition is Judeo-Christian. But he'll like have little practices where he'll like say something like, light a candle with friends or alone. Like, the day is done. Whatever didn't get done today will no longer get done. Like, surrender to that experience. Like, it's just like a beautiful invite into, and you start to realize sometimes in those moments you don't actually have anything that gentle in your life. Yeah. Like, our lives are lived sometimes quite forcibly. They're like, there's a pioneer spirit, and Colorado is notorious for that. Individualistic, pioneer, Western. Yeah. Like we drive through, like, there's a mountain in front of us. What do? We put a tunnel through it. Like that's how we do. And actually, like, at some point that's good, but at some point you have to put down the pickaxe or the driving iron or whatever, and you just say, okay, now at this point we rest. And
so there you go. Like, there's some great examples. If you're pondering making a big purchase, ponder again. Yeah. Really ask, or go home from work on time.
And the beautiful thing there, like, especially with the purchases, is like, I think I grew up in a tradition, and I've maybe said this before, where I felt like God was waiting for me in the right decision. Like, so like I was like, oh, I want to buy a sofa, I want to buy a car. And I'm like, if I get this right, God is waiting for me at the end of it. And now actually like realizing God is there with you in the decision. Like sometimes it's not about right or wrong, it's wise or unwise. Like that doesn't mean God doesn't lead you to a conclusion he wants you to come to, but that like sometimes it's not quite the life or death matter that we, like it might be that if you buy the new car, God isn't mad at you, but that you're actually opening yourself up to some of the things here that are, that like what was the language in 1 Timothy? Like he says something like, by the desire for riches, people have opened them up to temptations of all kinds or something like that.
Yeah.
That maybe actually you've just opened yourself up to that extra temptation, like one of which might be stress, one of which may be a lack of trust in God to be able to provide because you've stretched it a little too far.
Yep.
So in all sorts of ways, like just know that God is with you in the decision.
Yeah. Wild. I think many of us can feel the need to cut out some things or to create some margin for both our souls, our budgets, our time. Yeah. So dive into that. Thank you all for tuning in.
See you guys.
You guys can pursue some margin with us because we've already discussed we need to as well. Bye.